This is an invitation to a course on Frank Lloyd Wright and the 20th century. My name is John Lobel. I'm a professor of architecture at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm the author of a book on the philosophy of the architect Louis Kahn titled Between Silence and Light. So, why a course on Frank Lloyd Wright? Wright is generally recognized as one of the most important architects of the 20th century. His buildings are among the most beautiful we have. And to this day, those who own Wright houses find it a joy to live in them. But there's something far more profound going on here. Frank Lloyd Wright wrote, "Every great architect is necessarily a great poet. He must be a great original interpreter of his time, his day, his age." What did Wright mean by that? We might put it another way by saying that architecture is the crystallization of a culture in form. In other words, a culture is a collection of ideas, beliefs, and customs, and architecture expresses those in buildings. So what was Wright expressing? What were his concerns? I'm going to suggest in this course that Wright had two main concerns. First, to respond to and even define the 20th century. And second, to respond to and even redefine who we are as human beings through his organic architecture. Architects can have big egos. So this is going to be quite different from what you might expect from an architectural history course. It's also going to look at the culture out of which architecture grows, in this case the 20th century. And it will look at what Wright might suggest for our still emerging 21st century. Wright was born in 1867, just 2 years after the end of the American Civil War, into an agrarian world in which the transcendentalist Emerson was still alive. He died in 1959 at the age of 91 in the modern world of materialism and explosive industrialization, a world of automobiles, jet travel, electric communications, and satellites. Wright's first building on his own, the Winslow House, had stables in the back. One of his last projects, the Illinois, a proposed mile-high tower in Chicago of 1956, was designed to have atomic-powered elevators. So Wright's life spanned the end of the 19th century and the entire first half of the 20th. We'll begin with an overview of Wright's work. Wright's career was long, and he was responsible for over 500 completed projects located throughout the United States. Early in his career, Wright developed his prairie style, as we see in the Roby House. Here he used low-sloped overhanging roofs, an open plan, massive chimney core, an interpenetration of inside and outside that came to characterize the American suburban house of the 1950s and 60s. Then in the 1920s, he did a series of concrete tile houses in California. Then, after a long period without work, Wright did Falling Water in Pennsylvania in the 1930s, which epitomized his approach of integrating his architecture with nature and which brought him worldwide recognition. And finally, in the 1950s, Wright did a series of remarkable projects culminating in the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. After our brief survey of Wright's buildings, we'll look at some of the ways in which Wright engaged the 20th century. We'll ask such questions as, what was Wright's role in the development of modern architecture, and how did he influence other modern architects? And we'll ask, what was modern architecture? What was that? And what kind of architecture did it challenge, and what was its revolutionary agenda? And then we'll ask, are we still in the realm of modern architecture today? And if not, how should we characterize our own architecture? Then we'll ask, how did Wright's work embody the American movement from the small farm to the suburbs in his prairie-style houses? And how did that change the American family? And then we'll ask, what kind of changes are we seeing in the family today, and how will they be reflected in the architecture of today? We'll look at how Wright's architecture rejected the notion of a fixed observer and how that paralleled the observer in motion that we see in Picasso's Cubism. And then we'll ask, how does our architecture today reflect the art of today? Then, how did Wright's notion of space parallel that in Einstein's relativity? And how might the architecture of today reflect our contemporary physics? And finally, how did Wright respond to the new materials of his day, including reinforced concrete? And how will the architecture of today respond to our post-industrial materials, including fiber-reinforced composites? Toward the end of the course, we'll look at Wright's organic architecture. In Western culture, the individual is central, as we see in Palladio's Villa Rotunda, which provides a fixed central spot in which we can stand. In Eastern culture, the individual is integrated into the flow of nature, as we see in Katsura Imperial Villa in Japan, which is asymmetrical, allows an interpenetration of inside and outside, and is integrated with nature. Now let's compare the Villa Rotunda and Katsura with Wright's Falling Water. To which one is Falling Water more similar? That's one of the things we'll be exploring in this course. Finally, we'll think about Wright and the 21st century. Wright wrote, "Space, the continual becoming, invisible fountain from which all rhythms flow and to which they must pass, beyond time or infinity." How do we feel about that quote today? Wright did his first major body of work in the early 20th century. That was 100 years ago. So we will end our course by looking briefly at our emerging 21st century and ask, what can we learn from Wright about our own architecture today? So, who should take this course? Quite simply, anyone who is an architect, who aspires to becoming an architect, is interested in architecture, who just wants to learn more about architecture and about our most interesting and important architect. No background in architecture is required. We will explain everything as we go. So again, who should take this course? Anyone who enjoys architecture, ideas, and culture. I look forward to working with you in our course on Frank Lloyd Wright.